Hello and welcome to a splice of life science marketing. I'm Matt Wilkinson, and today I have with me Jasmine, as always, and Joeri Billast, the author of The Future CMO. You know, if you've got tech and vision but zero visibility, this one's really for you. Joeri is the Web3 CMO. He's a fractional CMO and an AI-powered content architect who turns fragmented messaging into systems that compound. He spends a lot of time advising Web3 and AI brands on strategy, structure, and storytelling, builds thought leadership that converts and amplifies live form keynotes and panels and on-site content creation. He also runs the top 5% Web3 CMO Stories podcast, featuring voices like Philip Kotler and execs from Ledger and Wallet Connect. So, Joeri, let's start with really exciting development. As you know, you're the author of The Future CMO. I'm just trying to make sure that shows up on the screen.
Absolutely. It just arrived today. So my big box, every moment that an author loves, when this box arrives with all the books, it happened just before the podcast episode recording.
Congrats.
Excellent. Congratulations. I know I had a front row seat at sort of looking at it just before it was launched, and I really enjoyed it then. But if you had to describe this book to a life science tools CMO who just grabbed coffee between back-to-back meetings, what's the one sentence pitch that would make them want to keep reading?
Yeah, one sentence is always challenging, of course. But for me, I call it like a playbook for modern marketing leaders, as I put it here, modern CMOs, but who need to prove their impact to the CFO. They need to use CFO language. And also on the other side, they need to navigate AI, communities in a world where technical competence is very important. And what really differentiates leaders today is audacity and is trust. I'm talking a lot about this in the book. Credibility is really important. So it's not a tech book. It's a leadership book more for marketers who want to stay human. While everything around them changes, it's based on real conversations. You mentioned my podcast. I had more than 250 leaders on my show. And so, this has been the inspiration for this book. So in one sentence, I would say it's the missing bridge between where marketing leaders, where they are today and where they are tomorrow.
I love that, the missing bridge. I also love the fact that you talk about it in terms of conversations, and I was thrilled for you to see that your book was endorsed by Philip Kotler, the father of modern marketing. What did that mean for you personally, and how do you see his legacy connecting with your vision for the future CMO?
That's a really interesting question. So, of course, having the endorsement of Philip Kotler, that's really amazing because for me, even before I hit publish on the book, it's already a success because, if Philip Kotler says it's good, well, and anyone can say anything. For me, it's already, I already won, right? So, yes, I had the pleasure of seeing him a few times, one time in the RISE community of Mark Schaefer, where Matt is also a member. I know, Jasmine, if you are in there.
I am.
You are there too. So, one time we had a Zoom meeting and Philip Kotler was there in a Zoom meeting. At a later moment, I had the pleasure of giving a keynote about the CMO of the future in Cairo at Marketing Plus. And Philip Kotler was the closing keynote after me, but he was online. And I connected then with Christian Sarkar, who is working with him together. And then I said, okay, I would like to have him on the podcast. So he came on the podcast, but if you don't know Philip Kotler, he's already 93, 94 years old. So the fact for him to say yes to come on the show was brilliant, was amazing. And then I said, why not just ask if he wants to, have a look at the book? And then he actually read it, and then he gave such a big endorsement. So for me, it was incredible. And for the book itself, of course, we all know Philip Kotler. If you are a marketer, you studied it, the 4 Ps, all the systems. But the conversation on the podcast was about value, how the CMO should be really occupied with value and avoid mistakes and so on. And that was one of the bases for the chapters of the book.
Yeah, congratulations again. That's fantastic.
Yeah, congratulations. Not only have you spoken to Philip Kotler, but you've had an incredible front row seat interviewing, I think you said 250 plus executives from Web3 and crypto on your podcast. Now, what was that aha moment that made you think, I really need to turn this into a book?
Actually, if maybe if you checked out my LinkedIn or my past, already wrote one book, The 5K Challenge for Solopreneurs, was a few years ago, was for entrepreneurs, but who work independently and who are starting their new business. And I said, I want to write a new book, but what about? And then so it's something that you have in your head, in your mind, but you will need like one push to start. And so, because I was creating all these podcast episodes and the blog content, so that's I repurposed it in articles. I got a lot of content, and then I had this opportunity to speak to Mark Schaefer. When he said in the community, I have some time for people who want to talk to me. I said, yes, Mark, I want to talk to you. And he said to me, Joeri, why don't you write a new book? You have everything. You have all these conversations. You have the keynotes that you have been doing. And I said, yes, why not? So in the beginning of July, I started to write, and then in 2-3 months it was finished, whereas my previous book took 3 years to write. So that was actually the push, Matt. So I had the content. I felt like I need to share it in another way, but someone needs to say, just do this. And that's what happened.
Fantastic. When you were writing the book, did anything surprise you about what these CMOs were saying and what they had in common?
Yeah, the trust factor, of course, was something that came back every time. The fact of being understood by the audience or within the company is important, but the trust factor to the outside. If you are now in Web3, because of my activities, I talk a lot with Web3 leaders or AI leaders. Trust is really important, certainly in crypto, but also in life sciences. Trust is also important. Trust backed by data, because you don't have trust, you go nowhere. So the trust factor was something that was really important. And then also what we just said about avoiding these mistakes, avoiding errors, and the way how you communicate about that with your customers, which again builds trust. So that was one of the main outcomes.
So one of your core arguments, especially at the beginning of the book, is that CMOs need to speak the CFO language, the language of finance, of margins, lifetime value, pipeline impact, and so on. In life science tools, we're in this interesting spot where on the one hand, our customers are scientists who care about data quality and reproducibility. And on the other hand, internally, we're still getting budget questions from finance. How do you recommend balancing both conversations, staying credible with scientists while proving ROI to the C-suite?
I'm not a life sciences expert, but for me, it's all about, you can reframe it a bit, reframe it as financial, I would say financial de-risking. So I learned this also on my podcast I talked to Harshit from Transact, Catherine from Space and Time. So they built their marketing around credibility, and then the credibility can then be used to lower acquisition costs, to increase resilience when the markets are a bit volatile. And so if you can connect the dots and can show it impacts margin impact, or it impacts margin to make the two languages come together, that's actually what you want. And then maybe you can think in terms of renewal rates, protocol adoption, reputation, forecasting growth, all of that. So for me, it's about, you can speak the two languages, scientific credibility and financial impact, but you need to make sure that you don't lose one of the both. And that's actually where the CMO needs to come in the ideal world.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's pulling on that red thread to connect the two and helping internally the CFO as well as the other business leaders understand the value of the scientific data, but in the business terms.
Yeah.
As we look at business, one of the big things that's obviously causing huge changes across so many business right now is AI. And you talk a lot about AI democratizing marketing competence, something that I know you and I have a big passion for. When I'm speaking to customers in the life sciences, one of the things that they really do struggle with is, because the content is so technical and accuracy is so important, they get pretty nervous about hallucinations or inaccuracies that then aren't spotted. How do you think about AI in a context where accuracy isn't just about brand quality, but it's also about its significant credibility?
Yeah, in a life sciences environment, I wouldn't let AI create reports or do the research, but I would use AI for structure and speed. So make sure that you can scale actually, but still humans needs to validate in industries like life sciences or any high stake industry. So you need to have the facts first, and then AI can help you come faster to the facts, but there will still always need to be a correct. And so what AI can do is expand the reach of what is already approved instead of, and then the hallucination, that's something that you need to be careful of. But if you take content that is already existing, of course, I've written the book. It's not like sciences, but still it's content that came from me, and AI helped me to put a structure in it instead of doing all the work myself and doing this piece of puzzles. So it's more like an assistant, I would say, an editorial assistant, or make sure that you can go faster, but not a research department. So it can speed up the storytelling, but not the science itself.
Brilliant. Thank you. I've definitely been advocating for keeping that human in the loop and having that sort of augmented human approach to creation. But you absolutely need to have an expert in the process. I had some questions at a SAMPS conference earlier this year where somebody was saying that they'd seen people letting go of creatives, as an example, because they felt that people could just get design work done by AI. And I was like, that's not an approach I'd recommend. Yes, I can now create imagery that I could never create before, but would I want to do that? There's a lot of design that you need to learn, and the same is with science, the same is with any of these skills within marketing. You still need to have a human really be able to ask the right questions. Otherwise, we end up just creating AI slop.
Absolutely. Like I give a talk about that in Lisbon too, about how you can use AI to amplify trust, but not to replace you, because there is so much noise out there because of AI, so much AI generated content, and that is not really building trust. So you need to use your own voice, your own, I would say, data, and then getting the help from AI.
Still along these lines, Mark Schaefer talks a lot about cognitive offloading as a potential negative outcome of AI, and just allowing AI to make the decisions on what good creative looks like, for example, or what good content looks like. I think it's so important that folks use AI as a learning tool, and as you've said earlier, as speeding up a process, but not absolving yourself of the responsibility of the creative and of the content creation.
Yeah. And something what helps me too is to have a discussion between different AI tools, like having Claude, having a discussion or a fight even with ChatGPT around the same subject. And then, it also gives me inspiration, that you don't directly grab it for granted, but the ChatGPT gives you, but that you are asking it questions and make sure that it is correct.
Yeah. Totally agree. So one of the concepts in your book that really resonated with me was the value equation of perception, trust, and outcome. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how that would apply in the life sciences, where we often have longer buying cycles.
Yeah, I think compared to Web3, where it is everything goes very, very fast. In the case of life sciences, the buying cycles are long. Therefore, it's the job of the CMO to make sure that you compound value of trust over time. And then think of publications, conference present, thought leadership. It's scientific reputation, and trust is then consistency, reproducibility, reliability, transparency. And the outcome then would be long-term retention, citations, discoveries enabled by the technology. And so in short cycles, you will optimize for engagement, but in longer cycles, it's credibility. Credibility is conversion. And that's why the longer the cycle, the more valuable trust equity becomes. And that's the hardest thing to copy, right? So yeah, it's in longer cycles, trust compounds interest, and it's slow to earn and impossible to fake, I would say, because it's longer.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the other part of longer cycles and the trust is that's where you have the most human elements involved, right? That's where your key opinion leaders are involved. They're putting their own reputations on the line as part of helping a company's technology build that trust.
Absolutely.
Just to add to that, I mean, I absolutely love the idea of sort of that building a trust, and it sort of brings me nicely onto your chapter on community architecture. I know you quoted our mutual friend Mark Schaefer's line about community being the last great marketing strategy. And one of the things that I've sort of noticed in the sciences is that, you know, our communities look pretty different. We're not really that engaged in sort of Telegram, Discord, even maybe on many social media channels. In fact, I'd argue that many of our social media channels are more sort of the peer-reviewed journals than, shall we say, likes on TikTok, for sure. And then when we sort of look at communities, people, you know, these key opinion leaders, they gather at conferences all around the world. They influence millions in purchasing, but they operate on very different metrics. How do you think, you know, how should we think about community building in these sort of more traditional spaces?
Well, it's also something that Mark says. It's about connection. It's about facilitating these relationships and not about broadcasting. Because if you're just broadcasting, then you have an audience. You don't have a community, as Mark always says. So what happens if you are no longer there? If the people disappear, then you have an audience. If people continue to talk, then you have a community. And that's actually what Mark always says. So for me, it's about connection, give other people a reason to connect. So it's not just about you, and create these belonging moments. This can be, for some places it can be on Discord or Telegram, but also real life at conferences can be really, really good. And it's not about the size. I can understand that in life sciences, it's another way of connecting of communities, but it can even work if you have 50 people in the community, or let's say a few thousand. It's still a community, and it's about co-creating stuff to create these belonging moments, I would say. And indeed, Mark says it's the last great marketing strategy, and I agree with him.
I agree as well.
Clearly, this whole concept of trust has resonated a lot with Matt and myself. Your trust ROI calculator is such a practical tool. Trust, technology, and smart visibility as key levers for CMOs. One thing that keeps me up at night in life science tools is how fragile scientific trust can be. We've all watched what happened with a company called Theranos, or seen how replication crises shake entire fields, publications get retracted, and so on. Do you think the same trust metrics apply when one quality issue or retracted paper can have such outsized impact?
Yeah, it's another ballgame, of course, in science. It can also harm patients, even in the worst cases. But I would say the core principles of trust stay the same, but the mechanics change in life sciences. Maybe you can think of 3 layers. First one, the preventive trust. So your validation protocols, transparency, your documentation. The second layer would be operational trust, reproducibility, reliability, responsiveness. And the third layer would be strategic trust, your contribution to advancing field, publishing openly, supporting replication, helping setting the standards. And so its recovery is impossible, I think, in the life sciences space, but prevention becomes the superpower for the CMO. And that's what I want to do also with the Trust ROI calculator. A crisis recovery metric is in there. How fast can you rebuild after you get a hit? And in science, that recovery window, I think it's not months, it's years, right? And Philip Kotler, like I said, he said on my podcast, The Idea of Zero Complaints. It's actually a book by Gautam Mahayan. It's a perfectly fit. You need to treat every issue as an early warning. So it's a warning system, it's not an inconvenience. And in science, I think every complaint is a data point. It's a data point for trust. And so trust is not only a marketing KPI, it's a system. And once it breaks in science, I think no campaign can fix it. So really important.
Yeah, I think zero complaints is everybody's responsibility throughout the company.
But the CMO is there, to make sure that everyone is aligned. That's actually how I see it. Yeah.
So moving on a little bit from sort of trust to sort of your AI marketing sort of maturity model, you sort of gauge sort of AI marketing maturity, some sort of very basic skills all the way through to autonomous marketing. It's really interesting. Jasmine and I ran a survey at the American Chemical Society Fall Conference in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago, and found that 63% of the organizations that were exhibiting weren't even piloting AI yet in the commercial industry. In general is at a pretty low bar engagement with AI in terms of how are we using that in our commercial teams. I know that that's not necessarily, it's not the whole story, and some organizations are really using it, but quite often they're sort of stuck with IT stuff. Let's just use Copilot and that's about it. What are sort of the realistic first steps that you recommend teams take to start looking at sort of looking at that maturity scale and looking at how to progress on it?
Yeah, I would see find a process where you're stuck that could go back, that could go faster. I gave actually a workshop in Belgium in the beginning of the year, and there were like executives from bigger companies. It was public affairs professionals, but also Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and so on. They were there. Even Microsoft was there, by the way. But then they should we do, because they are restricted in what they can do within the organization. And I say, okay, have a look at, is there maybe one experiment, one process that you can try to optimize with and test it, and then also speak to other colleagues about it, where they are stuck, and make these work groups. It should just be clear that AI is not about replacing people, what sometimes they are afraid for, but amplifying people. It's AI is assisting you. And then, as in the role as a CMO, the goal is to help people to use AI to make them, do their job better, and maybe make room for the more important things. So maturity is not about removing the humans. It's making them, focus where they need to focus by automating with AI.
No, it's really interesting you say that. I gave a keynote and ran a workshop at Saint-Gobain, a global construction materials company, over the summer. I was sort of talking to their European sales leaders, and we ran that. Sort of went through and ran a sort of series of workshops, and I'd say maybe 70 or 80% of the problems that they wanted to solve using AI really came down to trying to reduce admin. But also the other thing that was really interesting was trying to better understand the product catalog itself, because they've bought companies over the years. They've got a really, really diverse product range. And so actually being able to support the salesperson to understand, well, if somebody's talking about Windows, what things should I be talking about from a cross-selling perspective? And so then being able to sort of look at, well, if I'm selling Windows, maybe I should also be talking about not just the sort of the fixtures and fittings for Windows, but maybe it's insulation, maybe it's roofs, maybe it's doors. And so there's a whole range of things there that we're looking at, just being able to enable the sales team to actually function faster and kind of break out of the historical silos that they've been formed in. I thought it was just a really interesting thing. And they seem to have both a top-down approach to the way they were using AI sort of within their sort of commercial operations, but then also bottom up, really trying to do a lot of good education and really good sort of bringing the people with them. So I thought it was a really interesting approach they were taking.
What you're saying about sales too, sometimes when you are working in a niche for a long time and you read a text, your mind thinks that it reads something that's not there, or you miss stuff, and sometimes I just ask AI to analyze a text and it comes up with something and I said, is this really there? And I read again. Oh yes, it's there. It's not always hallucinating. Sometimes as humans, we miss stuff, and that's why AI also can help.
I did some work, some research, and sort of used it to help do some thematic analysis. And yeah, I think it's really good at, AI is obviously really good at prediction, but it's also really good at spotting patterns, and being able to spot patterns between words and transcripts becomes just so helpful. I think it really does open up the data that we're collecting in the systems. If we're using our CRMs correctly, if we're recording cool transcripts, it actually gives us a huge repository of data for which to actually to sort of get those early signals that actually, even before we get a complaint, might we be heading towards complaints in certain areas. So I think that there's really interesting things that use cases for AI that are probably unexplored just yet in most organizations.
Yeah, the predictive analysis is something I did at my former company. I had a business intelligence company before we talked about Gen AI and a ChatGPT moment. AI is already there for a long time, But you just mentioned also resonated, because for my book, you asked me what are the trends that you are seeing when you talk to different CMOs. I'm not remembering every conversation I have with every CMO, but AI does, and my blog does. So I asked it also, what are the patterns that you see in all these different conversations that I had? And so the combination of what AI said with my feeling and what my gut feeling, this together brought me to the book, actually.
So in chapter 8 on leading transformation, you spoke about organizational change. And I've been very lucky to be part of many transformations, some around integrations of two companies or two product lines, and sometimes it's just part of the strategy to have transformation, which brings on all other kinds of organizational changes that are so hard. For the early career marketers that are listening to this podcast, maybe they're running digital campaigns or supporting product launches. What's the one or two small things that they could do to start moving their team towards this future model and towards leading transformation?
Well, the first thing I would say, because everyone needs to start somewhere, if you cannot lead a transformation, what you can do is you can be curious, you can look at data, and you can take initiatives. And so all these things together can help you to measure success, but maybe in another way than the traditional way. And maybe instead of saying, oh, we got 500 webinar signups, you could say we got 85 signups, but it's really our ideal customer profile. And actually it's worth 2.3 billion in pipeline or something like that. So you're not changing what you do, but how you frame it, actually. And so when you start connecting this creative work then with the financial impact, that's how you can create or you can build credibility, I would say, with the leadership. And then they will see you as someone who understands business outcome and not is just doing campaigns that's how I call like the former CMO, the old CMO would do campaigns. The new one, the future ready CMO, is actually connecting this to the financial impact. So, and if you do this for 1 quarter, then probably if you work in a big organization, your manager will notice, and that's how you can evolve. And so you don't need permission, I would say, to lead with curiosity, but give the evidence that what you do creates value.
Yeah, I love the idea of looking at the data from a different angle. A lot of these marketers have the data. If we use the example of webinars, of who signed up for the webinar, how many have signed up for the webinar, but thinking about those data from a different angle of, as you said, the ICPs, the personas, maybe looking at how many times an individual or a group of individuals from the same company have attended a webinar or have engaged with other parts of the buyer's journey, and connecting that through to business outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that just sort of talked about value, and I really want to end on something you say in the conclusion, Joeri, that CMOs need to become chief value officers. I find that really compelling, and I've always believed that marketing's role was about accelerating growth and accelerating value creation and capture. One of the challenges I think we have in life sciences sort of tools particularly is that value creation is often really distributed. You have field application scientists going out there doing demos, building really close relationships with the customers and the users. You've got people, other teams generating data for the sort of the R&D teams. You've then got sort of customer success, maybe owning retention. You've obviously got sales and sometimes marketing is sort of a bit more considered sort of the colouring in department. The CMO isn't often coordinating this orchestra of instruments. How do you sort of look at a chief value officer when they're orchestrating but not controlling all those pieces? How do you take control of that and make sure that you're able to break those silos down?
I think you put it right. The CMO should orchestrate, should compose. He's not the conductor himself or herself. So yeah, if you look at the different roles in life sciences, you have maybe the field application scientists that create value because of they do demos. The publication teams, they create value through the data. The customer success, they build retention. The job as a CMO is then make sure that it all connects into a coherent story of value. And the practical way is to build a simple value dashboard around 3 pillars of the value equation. So you have perception, trust, and outcome. Perception is how the market sees your scientific credibility. Trust is how consistently you deliver on promises. And outcome, of course, is the measurable customer impact, research success, renewals, discoveries. And when all these functions align to this dimension I just mentioned, marketing becomes a bit of the thread that keeps everything together. And so the future CMO, like you said, doesn't control the orchestra, but can make sure that everyone's playing the same song of value.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I've learned so much today, and I know I'd already read the book, so thank you for taking the time to dig in even deeper into so many fascinating areas. A quick question, Joeri. If people want to learn more about you or get in contact with you after the show, where should they go?
A couple of places. So I'm active on social media, very active on LinkedIn. So I think there is only one person with my name. It's a difficult one. So just find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. I have my podcast, which is Web3 CMO Stories. You can Google it. It's on Spotify, on Apple. I also have my podcast website. There is my personal site, a blog linked to that, which is web3.net, which is actually Dutch for web3.net. And then, Matt, you're already in my community. I'm building a community based on the book, on the Future CMO, which will be the Future CMO community. There will be the audiobook for free for everyone that grabs the ebook or the paperback and comes into the community. And that you can find through joeri.link/future-cmo-school, SKOOL.
Well, thank you again, Joeri. And thank you for bringing the Future CMO to us today and making it so present for us today. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.